Shalom, I'm Chris. Let's follow Jesus along the Talmidim way. Lesson 30, we're calling this one Sheep Among Wolves, or it could also be called Faith Among Fear. We're continuing our journey through Matthew chapter 10, and it's called the Missionary Discourse. And this section, we're going to turn our attention to the lost and broken world as Jesus teaches us to rely on God in the midst of hostility and persecution. And I think this is very timely for us because we all need to be prepared for what possibly could be some dark days ahead. Christians in Western countries have had it pretty easy the last couple of hundred years or so, but there are signs that that may be changing. So again, this could be very timely for us. Father, we ask you to bless our study and have us be like the Bereans who receive the word with all eagerness, but examine the scriptures daily to see whether these things be so. And by this teaching, enable each of us to be doers of your word and not just hearers only. In Jesus' name, amen. So our outline here, we're going to, Jesus is going to talk that to be his disciple means to expect persecution. But on the flip side, we are to fear God rather than people. Do not worry about what people can do to you, but rather obey and serve God to the end if necessary. Then Jesus is going to talk about just the fact that he is here causes division because the world hated him. And so if the world hates him, it's the world's going to hate us as well because we are his representatives. And a way to think about that is we are, it's not us that they're hating. It's the vessel. We're just the vessel. It's actually him that they're hating. And conversely, the faithful will be rewarded when people accept or reject the sent one. When people accept our message, that they're accepting Jesus and not us. And when they reject us, they're actually rejecting Jesus and the Father. This turns out to be the second of 5 major discourses that Matthew includes in his gospel. And he has an interesting tagline that he includes after each one, and it's a kind of a signature line where he'll formally end each discourse, and we'll see that in chapter 11, verse 1. William Schlegel refers to this as the last stage of Jesus' 18-month public Galilean ministry, because after this, Jesus will prepare to take things more private. He'll pour into his disciples. He'll begin to openly discuss his mission to offer himself in Jerusalem. But for now, we have a few more public events to cover still. We aren't given any specific geographic location by this passage. We presume it's taking place somewhere near Capernaum, or as The Chosen portrays, you can see the picture on the right, perhaps it was even in Peter's home. And it's a great episode, if you haven't seen it, is Jesus saying, okay, everything I'm doing is now it's your turn. And the disciples are kind of, with their jaws hanging open saying, you want us to do what? And so there is some natural reaction to that. When we hear these things, it's not the best news that we're going to be persecuted and hated, but if we're going to be counted among his disciples, persecution just comes along with it. Starting at verse 16 of chapter 10, Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be as wary as servants and innocent as doves. Be on guard against people, for they will hand you over to the courts and flog you in their synagogues. And you will even be brought before governors and kings on my account as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. So as Keener notes, persecution and proclamation of the gospel are inseparable. Lots of figurative language in this section, and here he's telling us to be like certain animals. There's a general theme of incompatibility also running through. The sheep and wolves are incompatible. Later we're going to see a contrast between light and darkness. Those are also incompatible. But really a desire for the apostles, and then by extension us, to be comfortable in this world is incompatible with the life of a devoted disciple. Fear of the world is incompatible with faith in God. That's really the major theme through this passage. And so what does a sheep do in the midst of wolves? Well, the sheep needs to stay close to the shepherd for protection, and that's our lesson there. The Talmud also contains a similar instruction. How great is the sheep that stands among 70 wolves? How great is the shepherd who rescues and guards it and who thwarts them from harming it? So we're out as sheep in the midst of wolves, but we need to always remember that we have a shepherd looking over us. At the same time, we're supposed to be like sheep, but we're not supposed to be naive like sheep are. Sheep are kind of dumb animals. They're sort of notorious for that. In contrast, God gave us advanced brains, and we need to use them. But he doesn't tell us to behave like serpents, but he's drawing from Genesis 3 and how the serpent is crafty. And so we are to be wise like serpents. We could say what the serpent meant for evil, we need to use that, our craftiness and wisdom and intellect and experience, we need to use all that for good. We are to maintain our ethics, and that's with the purity symbolized by the dove. And we need to remember we represent Jesus at all times, and how we behave reflects on him. So we shouldn't incite anger or trouble needlessly, but that's really the gist of this lesson, is to be harmless as doves, but keep wisdom, keep your wits about you. Next it says they will scourge you in their synagogues. Now, you and I have no risk of being flogged in a synagogue. Why is that? Because we don't attend a synagogue. So this passage is actually a clue that Jesus envisioned a Jewish contingency that remained Jewish as they preached his name. The only way you would come under the penalty of a synagogue is if you were affiliated with a synagogue. And so for our application, I would say don't get hung up on the word synagogue here. Substitute the word church. Because attacks and persecution, what Jesus is saying here, attacks and persecutions will come from within just as easily as they can come from external forces. So don't discount the mainstream establishment church as a potential source of future persecution. When the true believers start to do things that are unpopular with the church, and I could name several examples of that happening today, the establishment building, whatever it is, the establishment will turn on us, and just like the establishment turned on Jesus in his day. So our lives are to be identified with his, is what he's saying. And of course, in Acts, Paul was brought before the synagogues, and he was also brought before Gentile rulers and even governors. So Felix and Festus, he was brought before kings, Agrippa the first and Agrippa the second. And according to tradition, Paul and Peter both died under the authority of Nero. And you can see a bust of Nero here. And so we are reminded of Psalm 119, I will speak of your testimonies before kings and not be ashamed. And for some of us, this could literally be true. But when they hand you over, do not worry about how or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who are speaking, but the Spirit of the Father who is speaking within you. As we go through this, there are several commands in this passage, and we remember that in Matthew 28, Jesus says, teach all that I have commanded, teach them to obey all I have commanded. And there's several commands here. Do not worry will occur several times in this chapter, and it'll written as do not fear also. So our biggest thing is we need to have faith over fear. Several commentators noted that verses 4 through 15 of Matthew 10 were specific to that day. But from verse 16 onward, Jesus shifted into forward-looking statements, what we might call prophecy. The missionary journey that the disciples went out within Israel produced none of these trials that we're going to read about in the last half of this chapter. And the Spirit hasn't been given yet. So we're in a sense, we're looking forward to the day where the Spirit is given out, and along with that will come some more intense persecution. Luke records Matthew's verses in his end times discourse all the way in Luke 21. And it's interesting that he moves that there. Probably Matthew was condensing, or very likely Jesus gave the same talk on different occasions. Some would apply the promise of the presence of the Spirit to basically put words in your mouth and say, when you're evangelizing, if you get nervous, don't worry because the Spirit will give you words. Now, that may or may not be true, but note here the immediate context is presenting a compelling legal defense when you're brought before a tribunal. It's not directly about witnessing. I'm not saying that's wrong to depend on the Spirit. Of course it's not, but note that what Luke says is make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will provide you eloquence and wisdom. And so there's that kind of immediate context of it. I'm not saying the evangelism piece is wrong, but just know that that's not exactly what the text says. If we follow Jesus in the midst of danger, in any case, the safest place to be is right there with him, because he will never leave us. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father betray his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. The hardest hurts are going to be from those closest to us. And believers in non-Western countries know exactly what it's like to be disowned by their families. And in many cases, a death sentence is pronounced when other family members, they see it as their duty to avenge the so-called insult upon the family caused by someone converting to Christ. So in our culture, it's still relatively uncommon to receive this degree of betrayal, but it definitely happens that we're ostracized and families divide over political issues or religious issues. We do see that today. If you haven't had people misunderstand you or turn on you because of your faith, it might be a good self-check to assess why that could be. Make sure the reason isn't because you aren't being bold enough in standing up for him, because persecution and betrayals and family matters will happen when we follow his name. You will be hated by all because of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be persevered, or most translations say saved. Jesus uses language here that's very reminiscent of the book of Revelation. He encourages his people to remain pure. And so again, saved here could be in the sense of persevered through the trial that they're currently experiencing. Read the letter to Smyrna for an example of the persecuted church and Jesus' encouraging words. He never says he's going to deliver them from the troubles that they have, but their challenge is to remain faithful in the midst of persecution. We don't endure to get saved, but we endure because we are saved, and that's the thought of the perseverance of the saints. We are his, and so he gives us the strength to endure to the end. Jesus makes a nearly identical statement in Matthew 24, one who endures to the end will be saved. And again, he's talking about persecution and the trouble that we can expect. Note that the persecution is not just because we're obnoxious, it's because it's for his name's sake. And so keep that in mind. I always think of the Messianic Jews in our day when talking about these divisions, because they're rejected by traditional Jews who view them as apostates and even traitors, and they're cast out. They're also rejected by Gentile Christians who don't trust them fully, and they call them bewitched Judaizers. So they're kind of they made enemies on both sides of the fence. So they might just be doing something right. They might be on the right track. Whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next, for truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. So certainly our next command is flee to the next city, and it's not if you're persecuted, but notice when you are persecuted. Paul writes in 2 Timothy, indeed, all who want to live in a godly way in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So this is not a fun topic, but it's just it just sort of comes with the territory. We have this promise that we will have trouble if we follow his name. We don't seek it out, and we don't foolishly pursue danger, but if we are just living faithfully in his name, then opposition will come. We're not to be passive victims, but we're to take reasonable efforts to continue the ministry. In fact, we see this in Acts chapter 8, verse 1. And on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except for the apostles. So in this case, fleeing to the next town actually spread the gospel throughout Samaria, and we read that in the rest of Acts chapter 8. So there's a value to being nimble and being ready to go in the case of persecution. So Jesus doesn't say just sit there and be victims, but do the best that we can to extend the ministry. So one thought that we had on our recent mission trip where we went over to Mexico was, does everyone have a current passport? Because what if the time comes where we have to flee? Then having a passport is one less obstacle that we might encounter if we have to get out and get out fast. It also removes an obstacle on going on a mission trip too. This is kind of a puzzling statement. You will not have gone through the cities of Israel. Lancaster reads that as the places of refuge to flee from one city to the next, will not be exhausted. Not that the spreading of the gospel will ever be finished throughout Israel, but right now, literally in Israel, there are still places that are welcoming to Messianic communities, which is kind of neat, right? Actually, in Jerusalem, there's a great biblical garden that's run by a Messianic family. It's actually the only Messianic, I think it's a moshav or kibbutz there, and it's a kind of a neat place to stay. So it's not always comfortable for Messianics and Christians in Israel, but it's not like major persecution either. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. It is enough for the disciple that he become like his teacher, and a slave like his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they insult the members of his household? And so our memory verse, and this verse is why we do what we do. We want to become like him. We want to follow him so closely that we are covered in the dust of his footsteps. Luke 6:40 says much the same. A student is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. And so we want to become like him. We want to be imitators of him. And that includes suffering as he has suffered, and persevering through insult and slander, just as Jesus did. That's what our call is. We also want to learn everything about him and follow him as close as we can. Another command: do not fear them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be made known. So one of the hundreds of do not fear verses in the Bible right here. We are not to fear, but we are to be bold in faith. And I think there's perhaps a double meaning here. Jesus' words to the disciple, which spread, appears to give the immediate sense, but he could also be referring to the persecutor's hidden sins. So those who are persecuting think they're doing a good thing, but on the day of judgment, they will be revealed. What I tell you in the darkness, tell in the light. What you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim on the housetops. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So several commands here. Tell in the light, proclaim on the housetops. Do not be afraid of people. Faith over fear. But rather, if we're going to fear, we need to fear God, because God is the one who has our ultimate destiny in his hands. So the idioms of light and darkness here are common throughout the Bible and represent spiritual insight and blindness, respectively. So just the thought of incompatibility. Light is not compatible with darkness. Faith is not compatible with fear. We are to proclaim the light and the spiritual sight that we have in Jesus to this dark and blind world. It's hard, right? It's hard not to be afraid when people are out against you, and even in those times where our lives may be in danger. But Jesus says, trust in him. Job says in Job 13, though he slay me, yet will I hope in him, or yet will I trust him, some translations say. So it's, we put our trust in him, and if martyrdom is our lot, then our outlook has to be so be it. We're going to serve him however he calls us to serve him. Are 2 sparrows not sold for an asarion, or that's like less than a penny, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, but even the hairs of your head are all counted. So again, do not fear. You are more valuable than sparrows. So again, another do not fear command. So is it any wonder that he's reiterating not to fear, because this is a tough assignment? And but he wouldn't give us an assignment unless he thought we could carry it out. So with that comes this reassurance that we are not to be afraid. This is called a call of Homer literary technique. It's light to heavy, or sometimes called the how much more argument. Jesus uses frequently, and the rabbis of his day also use this technique. And so the thought is, a father knows and cares for each sparrow. Sparrows are actually the least valuable of all birds, right? They're the cheapest. And a sarion is, again, less than a penny. But you and I are much more valuable to the Father than a cheap sparrow. So if the Father cares for a cheap sparrow, how much more does the Father know and care for us? So that's the thought here. We can't count the hairs on our head. Well, at least most of us can't. But God knows every part of us. God can count the hairs on our head. Even when it seems like the world is out of control, God is always in control. And again, we need not fear. Therefore, everyone who confesses me before people, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Of course, this verse is troublesome, and in a sense it should be, right? We don't ever want to think that denying him is okay. But Peter provides a proof that a slip-up is not what is in view here, because it doesn't disqualify us from the kingdom. Peter was, ultimately when Jesus needed him the most is when Peter fell, but yet Peter was restored. So this is obviously talking about a more permanent denial. Luke 13 says, I do not know you. Depart from me, all you evildoers. So an evildoer means habitually practicing iniquity, constantly denying him. So rather than making us nervous, how about we look at it like this? This passage should make us excited. If we confess him, but as we are instructed to do, we will get a good report from Jesus. So have the faith that we're going to have, that he gives us the strength to confess him publicly, and then look at it that way, rather than, well, what if I mess up? That's a position of fear. Be bold in your faith and standing up for him. Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I came to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against his mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A person's enemies will be the members of his household. So this statement would have shocked the conquering Messiah crowd of his disciples, those who wanted Jesus to come and overthrow the Roman Empire. Although it was believed that there would be great suffering before the end, that was only for the bad guys. Messiah was supposed to lead his people in triumph, followed by 1,000 years of peace. And that will happen one day, but it's just not now. Instead here, Jesus is saying it's the good guys who will pay the price. So again, challenging their thoughts about what Messiah is supposed to be. And I think we have the same risks. We want to make Jesus in our image, and it's important to study his words and see what he says, because it may not mesh with our own vision of how Jesus is supposed to be. Jesus is actually quoting here Micah 7:6. For a son disavows father, daughter rises up against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies are the people of his own household. Here's a situation, though, and that sounds bad, right? It's no one wants this, but it can happen. Jesus is just being realistic here. But I think this is a situation where Jesus probably expected his disciples to know this passage by heart. And so after this kind of foreboding verse comes Micah 7:7. And Micah 7:7 is a great memory verse also. As for me, I will watch for the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. So again, Micah, this is a walking in his dust verse, if ever there was one. And it's note the specific setting is in the context of persecution. So as we're being persecuted, we're going to watch and wait for the Lord, because the God of our salvation will hear us. And so that is just a fantastic promise. Jesus' message inherently brings conflict. And again, the choice is fear the world or fear God, right? The two are mutually exclusive. They are not compatible. When we are persecuted, let us watch and wait on and wait for the Lord. The one who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. The one who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. We see this in the life of Abraham, who chose to serve God above family, the God that he never knew until the day that he got called. So Genesis 12, Abraham left his father and his family and his kindred and his father's house. And then he was willing to sacrifice Isaac, his son. So he loved God more than his family and his son. This is not to say he didn't love his family, but he certainly did, but he just put God ahead. And so resist the temptation to read this like Jesus is overturning the commandments to honor one's parents. That's not at all what he's saying. It is a commandment with a promise that it will go well with you if you obey your father and mother. What he's saying here is that it's a matter of degrees. Love the Lord first and love your neighbors second. If we ever have to choose between loyalty to our family or loyalty to Jesus, we have to pick Jesus. And in fact, that was a common rabbinic saying in that day. If you were divided between loyalty to your family or loyalty to your teacher, the sages instructed that the teacher takes priority. And the one who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. The one who has found his life will lose it, and the one who has lost his life on my account will find it. This is fascinating because up to now he has given no indication of his eventual death by crucifixion. And so you and I just kind of read this and pass on because we know the cross is his ultimate destiny. But these would have been very strange words for the disciples to hear because the crucifixion was something that happened only to evil people, murderers and revolutionaries, and people that deserved it. But Jesus here is using that and turning it into a cross, meaning following in his suffering. So he's going to take the whole meaning of the cross and really turn it upside down. Basically, the intended meaning was unambiguous. They needed to be ready to sacrifice their lives for his sake. And as disciples, we have to be willing to die for him, just as he died for us. Sometimes pilgrims in Jerusalem take this literally, and you can see some people reenacting the way of the cross called the Via Dolorosa. John reminds us in chapter 12, the one who loves his life loses it. The one who hates his life in the world will keep it to eternal life. If we think we have found success in this life apart from Jesus, then we have truly deceived ourselves, because on the day of judgment, we're going to find out how wrong we were. But the good news, those who surrender this life to Jesus will not only gain eternal life, but will receive life here even more abundantly. And so the challenge for us is we try to not to do this, but we end up keeping one foot in the world and one foot in our faith. And so you have to live in this world, but we're not supposed to be a part of the world. We're not supposed to invest in this world because our kingdom and our citizenship and our treasure is supposed to be in heaven. And wrapping up the passage, the one who receives you receives me. The one who receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. The one who receives a righteous person in the name of a righteous person shall receive a righteous person's reward. Whoever gives one of these little ones just a cup of cold water to drink in the name of a disciple, truly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. So Jesus is circling back here to what we talked about last time in the concepts of hospitality and the fact that a sent one is to represent him. And if the person rejects the apostle, then the whole shake the dust off your feet that we looked at last time, they're rejecting him. That's a symbol of them rejecting him. But if they accept us, then they are accepting Jesus as well. Jesus bookends the missionary discourse with two contrasting phrases. So here he says, the one who receives you. Back in verse 14, he says, whoever does not receive you. So again, you have to appreciate the literary style of Matthew and how much of an artist he was, despite being a one who recorded facts and diligently kept numbers and all of that as a tax collector. He also had some poetry about him as well, which I just love. Luke 10, the one who listens to you listens to me. The one who rejects you rejects me. But the one who rejects me also rejects the one who sent me. And so this is one of the first times that Jesus is talking about how he has been sent from the Father. So it's not just that we're sent by him. If they accept us, then they accept him. If they accept him, then they accept the Father as well. How they treat the messenger is how they treat the sender. We talked about that in the last lesson. The sages say a man's shaliach, or a man's agent, is like the man himself. And it's not about us, I think, is the ultimate lesson here. We shouldn't confuse the vessel with the precious cargo. We're just the vessel. We're bringing the cargo, and if they reject us, they're rejecting the one who sent us. Jesus will reward those who receive his disciples is another thought here. If all you can do is give a cup of cold water, then that's what you should do. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah, which he contrasted, and we looked at that last time, they didn't even offer a cup of water to the visitors, and they were destroyed, some say, for their lack of hospitality in addition to their wickedness. Little ones here does not necessarily refer to children, but could be to beginner or novice disciples. And so those of us who are maybe further along the discipleship path, we should receive anyone doing Jesus' work as a disciple, even though they may be new believers or baby Christians or however we want to call it. And then here's Matthew's signature line here. When Jesus finished giving instructions to his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. Sometimes when we go verse by verse, we can miss the larger themes that can play out across passages, such as the chiasm, which is the inverse parallel structure I'll call out from time to time. I don't call out every one because it's actually all over the place. Videos would take a long time. But even across entire books. So Matthew has this little catchphrase, when Jesus finished saying these words or giving these instructions. And each of the 5 discourses that Matthew records, he concludes with this statement. I just think it's kind of neat. It talks about the artistry and the design that Matthew has. So the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus had finished these words, the kingdom parables, when Jesus had finished these parables, the community discourse, when Jesus had finished these words, and the Olivet discourse about the end times, when Jesus had finished all these words, and it goes on. So Chuck Missler used to say 66 books, 40 different authors, but yet also a single message. So there's a single author that's orchestrating all 66 books, and I love the continuity in the design. Just a quick list of the commands that are in this chapter. I think it's good to keep in mind as we take a little higher level view. Be wary as serpents, innocent as doves. Be on guard against people. So have your guard up. Use the knowledge that God gave you, and trust your instincts sometimes. When they hand you over, do not worry. That's the first of the do not fear passages. When they persecute you, be ready to flee to the next. So be ready to move out now. Do not fear. What I tell you in darkness, tell it in the light. So there's a command to proclaim his word. Do not fear again those who are able to kill the body, but we are to fear him who has our lives in his hand. And then one more, do not fear, in verse 31. So the thought of faith is greater than fear is the theme here. Do not be afraid. And a lot of times we live our lives in fear, but it's, God is freeing. God came to liberate us from the chains of fear. I'll close with this thought from David Platt. The reality we must face as believers is this: the danger of our lives increases in proportion to the depth of our relationship with Christ. Everyone who wants a safe, carefree life free from danger should stay away from Jesus. And so the question is, do we really want to be like him? I mean, really. And that's a quote from David Platt. So again, we all want comfort and safety, but sometimes that's not what God has called us to be. God calls us to step out in faith and not be afraid. Next time we'll pick up Mark chapter 6, and we'll look at Jesus's reaction and the story of the death of John. And so we'll cover that next time along the Talmidim way.